And we're live.
All right. Okay.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi, everybody.
Hi.
Thanks for joining us for our first GenX Think Tank broadcast. And we've had a few technical difficulties, and it's funny because, as I always like to say, we are really the digital natives. But I think we're so used to technology being so complicated that sometimes it gets really confusing. But anyway, it's fine because we're all here. So first, what we're going to do is everybody is going to introduce themselves, name sort of what you do, or like what you like to do, what you enjoy doing. You know, a little bit about yourself, and if you're like a young, middle, or older Gen Xer, like I, for example, I'll go first so you sort of see what it is. I'm Amy Vernon. I do stuff on the internet. I was a journalist for 20 years, and then that all went to hell. And I am an old Gen Xer. I am definitely in the first third of those 15 years of our shortest generation ever. So I'm going to go from left to right on how everybody is showing up on the bottom of my screen. So first is Sasha.
Oh, hi, that's me. Hi. It's Alexander. I'm a visual artist and designer. Very important thing is to mention is that I'm an immigrant. I'm Serbian. I live in the United States for 8 years, so I have a little bit of a different experience in terms of these categorizations and boxes like Gen X, Gen Y, millennials, and stuff like that. But it's, I think, I mean, when Amy invited me, we thought that it might be valuable for me to contribute some of my experience from a different culture. So I'm actually interested also to learn something more about, and what I'm interested in are actually cultural differences and how all these generational stereotypes and boundaries are defined here or somewhere else. That's all for me. I'm an artist. I said that. That's all. Live in New York. Married.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, New York.
43, which is, I don't know what, like middle or like older.
Older.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, older.
Not the oldest. Not the oldest. 65 is the oldest. Born in 65.
Okay, I'm 71.
So
All right.
in the middle section of.
Okay.
Of,
So.
Okay. Great. Okay, now I'm going to go to Durga, who just popped up again. So before her technical difficulties take her away, Durga, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us why you're here? Okay, Hessie, why don't you go?
Okay. Hi, I'm Hessie. I work for our company, and Amy Vernon is a friend of mine, and we decided to do this Gen X thing because we realized, based on the learnings that we're getting from the Millennial Think Tank, we actually have a lot to learn even about ourselves and our generation. So I am an older Gen X, and a daughter of immigrant parents, live in Toronto, and wanted to really understand the generational stereotypes and determine whether or not there's actually a real difference between you know, who we were when we were the same age as the millennials at their age now, and whether or not we're going to evolve or you know, differ as we age. So.
Great.
Neat.
Leslie?
Laurie.
Oh, Laurie. I'm so bad with names. It's really awful. There we go.
Okay, so Laurie Dillon Schalk. I am a friend of Hessie and Amy, and now Amy. And, well, what do? I am near the first candidate whose name I've forgotten already.
Sasha.
Sasha. I'm about Sasha's age, 45, a little bit older, so I guess I'm an old Gen X. What do I do? I'm in the digital advertising space. I work for a large ad agency, and I'm blessed to work on a lot of amazing brands. And essentially, I help companies find marketing advantages using technology, mostly social technology, but technology.
Cool. Ryan?
Okay, my name is Brian. I'm an international hedge fund manager. I am a retired film and television producer. I'm not going to say that I'm from the older Gen X crew. I'm going to say angsty. That's still the first third, but I think we're the angsty ones. So yeah, the same as basically everybody else, ripped off and abandoned, and now a corporate shill. So what are you going to do?
I can hear all that, Ryan, when it comes to
I'm a friend of his, and through social media and this thing, Amy, I guess, and I suppose that's it. My perspective, I think, on the Gen X stereotyping is probably a little different because it comes from a sort of a global, huge business enterprise perspective where the boomers really had it for a long time, and that's it.
Okay. I saw Angela came on, but I'm not sure. Are you there?
Yeah.
I'm still here.
I'm on too. Durga's on.
Oh, great. Okay, well, we'll do Angela and then Durga.
Awesome.
Hey. So everybody's introducing themselves and sort of talking about why we're here, and then we're going to dive in on some conversation.
Okay. Well, I don't know really what to say. I found about this group through Amy, and I think my place in Gen X. I've always been very uncomfortable with the slacker generation. I think it's a misnomer. I work typically 60-hour work weeks and am really devoted to mission-oriented stuff. I work with predominantly Latino leaders in Arizona, and on occasion I have the opportunity to do it on a national stage. And I enjoy my work and I'm really devoted to it. And although I will say that a lot of the pop culture Gen X stuff is still something that I am very attracted to, I just I don't know if I agree with this slacker generation stuff.
Slacker generation.
Okay, Durga.
Okay, I'm Durga, and this thing is not liking my webcam right now, so I'll just have to roll with it. But it's fun to be on this call. I ran across Amy in the article because your article, Gen X, or the storm brewing between Gen X and Gen Y, was citing my article, which was awesome. And what I do for a living is I am a consultant for organizations that are looking to break new territory, whether it's they have a new product or are trying to get into a new industry or a new market, and I sort out all the issues between getting from A to Z, building the sales and marketing channels, the sales processes, the reputation, brand strategy, marketing, all of that kind of stuff. Not so much on the execution side as much anymore, where I don't have to be. But I'm on the problem-solving and strategizing end. But because I deal with so many different companies and see so many different environments, I've seen this kind of generational friction over and over again. And it persistently gets on my mind. But until I wrote Letter from the Forgotten Generation, I thought it was only on my mind, and I just sort of threw it out there on the LinkedIn to see what would happen, and I didn't expect the article to just go bananas. So it was a relief. You guys from Gen X, you remember when the Blind Melon video came out in like '94 for the song No Rain, and there was the Bee Girl, and then
Yep.
the beat girl finally finds all the other beat girls. That's what it was like. It was like, oh my God, there's other bees. You know, I've always gotten accused of, oh God, Durga, you think too much. So my thinking on all this generational stuff, I thought it was just kind of like hyper analyzing.
Okay.
Human behavior is that it comes up for a lot of.
Helen just joined us too, so I want to let her introduce herself quickly before we jump into the conversation. But there's a lot of threads, a lot of things that all of you said that were on my mind to talk about tonight. So it's really great. I think this conversation will be really interesting, and will set the stage a lot for. First, Helen, you of 7,000 last names.
Well, both Keith and Mosier are all my last names, but right now I'm sorry for having my camera off, but my 5-year-old is trying to cameo and beg for milk even as we speak. Wait a minute. Okay.
You are a little muffled.
But you can hear me, right?
Yeah, no, that's better.
Yeah.
Why, how can you see you? You're making them laugh, though.
Okay.
So it's kind of pointless for me to introduce myself because he's going to keep weighing in. I'd like to just kind of stay tuned for now, but most big old get off my lawn kind of person. Earlier today I saw something in which they were talking about how we should blame the economic meltdown on the boomers, not the millennials, and I'm like, you can't even get the blame game going on Gen X at this point. Been writing about it for some time. In 2008, I wrote an essay for a blog on generational stuff that had to do with the coming wave of social media and so on, and I can share that. We have something going on with stuff, but yeah.
Okay.
Can you guys hear Helen? Or no? You're a bit muffled, Helen.
Okay. We're getting a little bit of an echo.
Okay, yeah, my computer's doing that. I'm just going to turn it off.
Okay. All right. So basically, I thought we would start actually a little bit connected to what Sasha was talking about, which is sort of and we were talking about this a bit, where sort of the whole idea of the slacker generation and Gen X is a very American name. It's you know, we have to label everything. However, there are so many things, and we've talked about this a lot, and we've had coffee or drinks or whatever else about those shared experiences from our youth. That it was a very particular time of the Cold War basically defined our youth, and it was different how it defined our youth in the U.S. than it did for Alexander in what was actually still Yugoslavia.
Yeah.
But it still was this defined our entire childhood from birth until college, when everything started basically falling apart in Europe. So I wanted to talk about how that experience, how that as a defining wall, really. I mean, the Berlin Wall may have been a wall around our childhood, because the idea of this divided Europe affected everything, and it was U.S., Soviets, and who's going to drop a bomb first, whether or not you really thought anybody was going to drop a bomb. So I'd like to talk about that, and so how that affected our lives growing up in a lot of different ways. I would like Alexander to address that first, because your experience is so different. Yet I think it also sort of brings us together in understanding that some of these things really were universal in scope.
Yeah, I would just like to mention that thing you just mentioned about how we are coming from different cultures, but for instance, how we met through this like online, also Angela too, through this online service called Turntable FM, which is like collective DJing and having a party online. And we were all there for the love of same music, of the 80s music. And after like 2 sessions, I had a feeling I grew up with these people. I never met them ever, and it was such an amazing actually feeling to feel that completely unknown people to me, complete strangers from a totally different culture who listen to the same music, who have enormous kind of feeling of bonding with them, like you knew them forever. So that's kind of like on the lines of trans kind of national and transcultural values of all these generation definitions, which I find music being very important and very interesting. My experience from Yugoslavia, a lot of people actually think that Yugoslavia was part of the Eastern Bloc. It wasn't. It was in between East and West. We were never part of the Warsaw Pact. So basically, the fall of the Berlin Wall literally never affected us so in such a way that affected other countries who were part of the Warsaw Pact or not part of the Warsaw Pact. It was a huge deal, of course, globally, but it never affected us in that way. What did affect us was this war that broke out in 1991. And that's actually my defining point. I was a teenager in the 80s. I was drafted. I ended up in the army, and I turned 20 in the army. And war broke out. The war broke out, and at that point, I realized that we are cannon fodder. That our generation was a cannon fodder for very ugly, very dirty war that was going on in ex-Yugoslavia. That was something then, in a kind of very ugly way, it gave me some sort of a frame of reference and some sort of like it was an orientation point towards generation before me and generation after me. I like to call them that way, not like Generation X, Y, Millennials, etc., etc. I know people in the U.S. love labeling and categorizing and boxing stuff, which is great. And well, sometimes I like a little bit more of like an elusive, a bit more blurry boundaries. I think they're more healthy. At that point, I realized what's before me, what's the generation of my parents, and what's after me. I realized years later when I started teaching to these kids who were actually born in the 80s and late 80s. But I'll try to be very short. My experience was actually really my experience of understanding the belonging to my generation was actually unfortunately the war. A lot of my friends actually died in the war. The entire generation is scarred big time by war, and not just by war, but by living in two totally different universes, which is socialism in the 80s and 70s, where we could like travel everywhere, we had money, we were totally fine. And all of a sudden in the 90s, we're poor, we've got nothing, and we live in a war-torn country, which is just like, you just cannot imagine the feeling of that terrifying split. And it happens when you're turning 20. It's just absolutely marvelous. But it actually helped me understand a lot of things about my own generation that suffered a lot, but also generation after me and before me. So I'll be that's all for me for now. I hope. Did you hear me at all? Your faces were kind of blank. Like, what the hell is he talking about?
No.
Okay.
No.
I heard you, Alexander. It just, my thought process is.
No. Who was that? Durga? Were you speaking?
I was, but it's okay.
Go ahead.
Can you still hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I'm not.
Oh. Oh, okay. You're from that sort of angsty part of Gen X, and I think because I'm sort of from that end of Gen X too, and I think Alexander's point of sort of that split, even though obviously that was a much bigger sort of split than we were experiencing, which is sort of the.
That's a huge split. I sympathize, Sasha. Sorry.
It was such a weird. It was such a weird time, really. I think because there were so many things going on. So I'd like for you to address sort of like what you were talking about, sort of that angsty thing, because I think the older Gen Xers are definitely a little angstier than some of the younger Gen Xers.
Yeah.
Well, I think that, rather than it being a geopolitical kind of awareness, which I don't think we really had at that time, we were this, they call us the lost generation, right? Because what did we have? How many of us, Alexander said we're sort of all bonded by this music, which is true, right? There was this weird little brief moment in time when you had like classic rock and new wave colliding. And there's never been as many one-hit wonders in their life. And if I said to anyone on this call, if I said, oh hey, remember Tarzan Boy, Baltimore? What a nightmare of a song! But you all listened to it. You probably have it in your retro collection. I have it. It's here. It's not good, but I have it. Sly Fox, whoosh, where do those guys go? Gone, right? But it was like 60 times a day for 3 straight weeks, and then vanished. But did we all listen to it when we were in high school? No, everyone was listening to CCR and Led Zeppelin and the Rolling Stones and shit that wasn't our music, right? That wasn't ours when we were listening to it. Stole it from the previous generation. It was all Jimi Hendrix, it was Deep Purple, it was Sabbath. It's not ours, it was like my stepfather's.
Yeah.
And then later, when we were in our 20s and people were talking about retro, we came back and said, hey, that shit's ours. That's from our generation. Yeah, but we weren't really listening. Did you all listen to the Top Gun soundtrack? I doubt it. Not when it was coming out, but later, everyone sort of bonded with it. And as Alexander said, to this day, as a generation, culturally, that kind of brings us together, this love of these weird sort of eclectic genres. And I think, in terms of a slacker generation, I think that's what the boomers called us because they didn't understand. It's not like we were slackers, right? There's been a ton of comments here in the chat thing about how hard everybody works. It's not that we didn't work, it's that we didn't value the same material gains that they valued. So it's very difficult to relate to a generation that's coming into the workforce that just to sit there for 90 hours for the Ferrari. Doesn't give a shit about the Ferrari. It's like, no, I'm cool. You know what? I've got my car. I've got my apartment. I got my stuff. I want my time off. I want to rock climb. I want to go kayaking. And they were like, well, but we can incentivize you. You're like, I don't want the incentivization. So.
But part of that too is that when we came into the workforce, there no longer were those incentives. There no longer that sort of workplace where you were going to have a job and then have a retirement that began to cease to exist at that time when we were coming into the workforce. It was also there were no jobs.
I don't know.
And when I graduated in 1991, there were no jobs. And Hesse and I were talking about this earlier, where it took Hesse. You were saying, what were you saying earlier?
Well, I think I wanted to go back to Ryan's point about being a slacker generation because I'm not trying to. I think that there's a reason for that, and that part of it is I don't know if any of you actually were latchkey kids. I was. From the time I was 5, I was walking home by myself with my sisters, and my mom and dad were working, right? So we had to learn how to fend for ourselves. We had to learn how to do things for ourselves. And my mom wasn't there all the time. Not because she didn't want to, but also from an immigrant family, they had to be out of the house all the time to work to be able to support 4 kids. But it made us a lot more independent, I think. And because of that, surviving through, not being able to get a job at a university and figuring out what to do in between until you can get that dream job. It was normal for us. That's what I'm thinking. But being a slacker, I think we fell into whatever that we had to do with it, to do what we could to get to the next thing. So.
Well, Angela, you were just saying in the chat that we wanted luxury, but we wanted it in different ways.
Yeah, so I was thinking about how best to say this, but I think that I'm making notes, so you have to excuse me. But the idea of, at least being in America, the economic stability that we enjoyed in the 90s allowed some of us to live that single lifestyle where we were able to go listen to bands at our leisure and sit around and think about thinking and not necessarily have to worry about having the fancy car, because we could take, if we were in a relatively large city, we could do public transportation. So there were these moments where I think I can think back to my early 20s to mid 20s and think about how much time I had, because of the privileges I experienced in life, to sit around in my studio apartment on milk crates and think. And I just think that was sort of the beginning of the introduction that you see maybe the millennials taking to a whole different level of, well, depending on who you're surrounding yourself with, millennial-wise, even they have their own factions. But there's a certain faction of millennials that are very engaged in community activism and work that exists for our generation as well. And yeah, I guess I saw that as a luxurious thing to have that time to sit around and think.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, very clearly.
Okay. I've had a bunch of thoughts running through my head. This is such a great conversation. I think where someone pointed out, I think it was Ryan that pointed out about being more angsty at the beginning of the generation rather than the end. And we were talking about music and whatnot. The angst, I think, I don't know. I mean, I was born, according to the Pew Research study, I was born like 3 days before technically the Gen Y started. But I identify way more with the frame of reference from Generation X because I grew up just like most Gen Xers, divorced parents from early in life. Mom decided to go back to school. She had been a concert pianist and she didn't think she could support us, so she went back to school. So I was pretty much out the door in the morning on my own all day until dinner time, and just kind of came up bootstrapping it. So I think that a lot of the kind of institutional distrust that they talk about with Gen X and the general cynicism when it comes to authority figures in large institutions and really just pretty much anyone in charge. I think that I got that pretty good. Music, it's interesting because I remember in high school I was listening to all the 60s and 70s stuff. I got really into the Doors and Janis Joplin and whatnot, and that was like the cool thing to be like a hippie. But the music going on around me, I think it depends on different demographics. I was in Washington, D.C., so what I remember most is when Queen Latifah used to rap. And, MC Light and Latifah and all that. But I also remember exactly the moment that Kurt Cobain died, but I was equally distraught when Tupac died. So, I don't know. The angst hasn't shown up until I got into my 30s. In my 20s, I still thought that I was fully equipped to take over the world, and it didn't matter what anybody else was doing or not. And I think that, getting into the 30s just caused me to sort of run up against the blockages of these old systems and institutions that are, like, in our way. One thing that I've read is that as generations tend to get older, and we have this going on the little chat stream a little bit, they tend to change. Like the boomers in their 20s were the idealists that were riding in the streets and considered themselves non-materialistic, and all their parents were saying that they were slackers, and then once they got older, look at how they're voting now. Look at how conservative they've gotten. So there's articles I've read, when I remember which ones to cite, I'll put them up on the Google Plus page, that talk about an anthropological tendency for generations to cannibalize the generations that are coming up behind them. Like the older ones kind of cannibalize and feed off of the ones that are coming up underneath. And if you look at the way that the boomers have been voting the last 20 years, it's kind of not in the interest of anybody younger. And I wonder if we're starting to do that a little bit to the millennials when we complain so much about them being entitled and all that other kind of stuff.
Well, you know, I think the issue that comes up there is it's like we've become the old guys standing on our porch yelling at those damn kids to get off our lawn, and it's just like
I don't feel remotely old. I don't know about you. I feel a little bit old.
I mean, it happens with every generation, you know, definitely. But one of the things is that we're somehow or another, I don't really like understand that, but somehow or another we're the smallest generation. All other generations are like 20 years, and somehow or another we're 15 years. That's because it's more from an anthropological standpoint, where it's more defined by these eras. Like 65 was when the birth rates plummeted. 64, 60 birth rates dropped off the cliff, and that's when the pill came out. And I forget exactly what it was about 1980, but it was like another. It was when I think that was when the birth rate started. Actually, that was more of an immigration thing, because the reason why millennials are so large.
It's the boomers having their children.
Right, but the birth rate, it's not birth rates that cause millennials to be such a large generation. It's immigration that's caused millennials to be such a large generation. Because in number, in population, they're much larger than Gen X. They're larger than boomers, but the birth rates aren't like what they were for boomers. It's an immigration. It's a matter of immigration that's caused the millennials to be so large, because birth rates have stayed low. So we're sort of stuck between these two. Yeah. Angela.
I was just going to say, I think part of that was, if you've read Freakonomics, part of that is attributable to Roe v. Wade as well. That was what 70-something?
Roe versus
74?
Yeah, it was, yeah.
That changed birth
Leslie,
rates as well, significantly.
I wanted to call you Leslie, Lori. I am sorry. I will get your name right before the end of tonight. But you've started to say things a couple of times, and I wanted you to.
So okay. Thank you. I don't actually. I know the Generation X as a sandwich generation. So I don't associate it with angst. I certainly don't associate it with the wall and the Cold War. I feel like the Cold War was something my parents might have dealt with, because I was born sort of during the Cold War. Now, I definitely appreciate, for someone like Sashi, you lived through the crumbling of the Berlin Wall, so it meant a lot more to you in ways I can't appreciate. But the sandwich generation for us, knowing that we had so many boomers in positions of employment and graduating in an era where we were in a complete recession and couldn't find things, that's sort of how I think of the Generation X. I'm not sure that everything I know Generation X to be isn't also associated with generations. So, you know, as we get older, are we going to start voting conservative? Well, I hope not, but, you know, we might. We'll see. Not yet.
Well, I mean, I think the point at which boomers started voting conservatively was certainly younger than we are now.
Perhaps, I don't know.
There is a really great book that that some of you might end up wanting to pick up or download, called The Coming Generational Storm, and I don't have it in front of me right now, so I don't remember the name of the author, but The Coming Generational Storm rocked my world about generational economics, because he's got former chief economists from presidential administrations that were part of the input to this book, talking about the amount of money that have been promised to the boomers in transfer benefits, meaning Social Security, Medicare, and other benefits as they go into retirement, and how that hasn't been included in the figures when they're doing the budgeting, because it doesn't look good. So whenever the chief economists have brought this up in these administrations, it's basically been kept out of their numbers and out of the public eye. And what he said is that when you add in the amount of money that's been promised and do the math on a generation that is much smaller in terms of numbers, because we're so small, but also we're such a smaller taxpayer base, that puts us and the generation behind us in the position of paying out 85% of our income in taxes by something like 2025, or I think it might even be earlier. It's been a while since I've read it, just to support the boomers going into retirement.
Yeah, well, that's not going to happen.
I hope not. I mean, there was good data, but then again, there was good data for Y2K too. So I think that there is a measure of validity to this stuff, and then other stuff we just won't know until it happens.
Sort of what I mean by that is when I was still at my last newspaper, and there were people complaining about how their pensions were being frozen and there were no more contributions, and I looked at them and I said, I'm Gen X. I knew I was never going to have a pension. What's a pension? And it was just all these people who were older than me were all very upset.
I would agree with that.
To their pension.
Well, I've never counted on a pension from the government for sure, but I have to say I do resent my money going out to pay for stuff that other people are getting that I won't be getting. It makes me kind of pissy. I gotta say. And I love my grandma, I really do, and I love my parents. I don't know how I feel about supporting all your parents.
Yeah. It's interesting. My parents aren't boomers, right? Are your parents boomers? Because my parents aren't boomers. My parents are whatever the generation is called above the boomer.
The greatest generation. No, mine are boomers. My dad is 60.
Silent is a little older, isn't it?
Oh, no, the silent generation.
It's called the greatest generation because it was the World War II generation.
No.
The one after that. I think the silent generation is right.
No, the silent generation was their parents.
My mother is the silent generation, which was the generation.
The greatest generation was called that because of World War II.
Silent generation. Yes.
Okay, I'm going on Google.
Okay, so Lori, what was your point?
Helen just dropped it in the chat. That is it.
Drop it. Okay.
Anyway,
I want to get a perspective.
Yeah. Lori, my mom and dad were both silent generation also.
There you go.
And I think that also is part of it, is the difference between the younger Gen X and the older Gen X. And part of that is also, I mean, boomers, it was 20 years. So there were boomers who were born in 1945 who were so yeah, Helen, you've been on mute a lot, and you're dropping all this like major knowledge in the chat. So Helen,
Helen has to mute herself.
Still.
Turn the microphone on. Are you kidding? All right.
Okay, there we go.
There we go.
Debbie can't see me. It's been so hard.
We're muffled. Okay.
No, he's coloring, but anyway.
Okay. Yeah, you're really muffled, Helen. So we'll just keep dropping the knowledge. But basically, I'm sorry. Did you love like the first of anything where we're just like all dealing with all these technical difficulties? The next one you're not even going to recognize it. It's going to be great.
Hey, Amy, did you want to? Can I interject for a sec? I'm wondering if there is a difference because there's 3 of us from Canada here, right? And I understand everything that Durga is saying from that perspective about like the fact that a lot of the millennials and the Gen Xers will start funding the boomers because of the amount of population even from a healthcare perspective in the States. The stats I hear in Canada is that in 5 to 10 years, over 65% of our taxes will actually go to healthcare. And Lori or Ryan, I kind of want you to weigh in on that first of all, from that perspective, because this is a huge thing for even our generation or even Canada to have to deal with, because that means that 35% could go to everything else, which is a whole hell of a lot. So.
Yeah, but that's like, I mean, you presuppose that what's promised is actually what's going to get granted, and that's not how it works, right? These kind of fiscal economic promises are meant to be promises in the moment. So if you think that when we're running it all, we're going to give up this money, it's not going to happen. But right now, the boomers are the most powerful political and economic generation. So if you say, yeah, you're going to get jack shit when it comes your turn, you know, nobody is going to move up the ladder, get elected, anything without those promises. But once it comes time to pay the bill, we're not going to pay it. No other generation has. And that's just been the way that it cycles through economically the whole way. So if you look at, I mean, whenever someone, and I think it was Durga brought up the presidential chief economists, yeah, every single one of them supported deregulation of credit swap derivatives pre-2008 collapse. All of them, every one of them. In fact, Larry Summers became the president of the business administration at Harvard after that. Right? He supported it, said, no, it's all good, it's all going to be fine, it's all good. And then it collapsed, and they went, yeah, well, it was those mathematicians, and I don't know what they were doing. But so that kind of ideology, I think, when it comes to the financial debt that you get saddled, it's just not going to play out that way. You know, someone's going to come and say, hi, we're going to take away 60% of your income. You're going to say, no. What are they going to do? Pound their cane on the table? It's just like it doesn't work that way. That's not capitalism, and that's where we live.
We're in a socioeconomic country. Remember that, Ryan. We're not the U.S.
Hi, have you met our prime minister? You met him, right? The raging communist? No. I mean, if there's anybody that could possibly frack, sell shale gas,
wow,
I don't know, mine underneath the polar bears, whatever that guy can do, that guy is gonna do.
Okay.
You know, dollars win, right? To that guy.
Okay. Lori, what do you say about that?
I'm going to talk about derivatives.
Please don't.
Just kidding. You know what? I'm guilty of not having the same concern, I'll be honest. Like, I just, maybe I have a smaller scope, but I can't stand people with benefits that are unequal to the private industry. So I haven't even wrapped my head around, you know, teachers and people that are getting 16 different massages a year and paid vacations when they retire. So I don't even know that when I think every day, I don't really think of generational differences. I think of private versus public sector differences. I'm not sure if that's really helping your argument.
No. It's a different and I think this is something the people that still work in government, right? They still get a lot of benefits that a lot of us are, you know, don't get anymore. And I think that's a totally different topic that we have to discuss at some point in time. Anyway.
I think what Lori said has a lot of validity, that The divide is for sure public more than it is anything else.
I'm just gonna
You know what? I guess it boils down to I'm not sure that that's the generational issue that I focus on personally. Like, I do come back to some of the sandwich stuff, but I feel the squish, but I don't feel like it's holding me back. I don't feel that now in my 40s that boomers are the reason why I can't get further. I don't feel that way at all. And I don't know if that's more to do with my age or to Gen X. I do experience what it's like to manage a millennial, and I don't know if that's millennial or just young people. But I do think there is something to do with the having a boomer as a parent, and the entitlement might be the wrong word for millennials, but the back patting is incredible.
Well, I think a friend of mine told me once that people call boomers helicopter parents, but that Gen have been termed fighter jet parents, because it's almost like you mess with my kids and like you like zoom in and like you blow everything up, and it's just like and I think that's a reaction to sort of the divorced parents latchkey kid thing of our childhood. Everybody reacts to or with to what they expect. Your parenting is in large part a result or a reaction to how you grew up.
I think that brings up
Yeah, no, go ahead.
Nope, sorry, sound delay.
Okay. But Angela was just saying, that millennials, for example, say downtown Phoenix. So.
Right.
What do you?
I think that it's something that has been coming up in a lot of conversations, circles I run in here, is millennials have never really heard no. That's just not something that was part of that vocabulary. And, that whole concept of getting a prize for showing up and those sorts of things, that actually helped, because they saw something in downtown Phoenix that, quite frankly, was destitute, and the only thing happening there was a small version of the Arizona State University campus. And they saw an opportunity where, I'll be honest, us Gen Xers, at least, again, the circles I run in, we're kind of a negative bunch of people. We are very crabby and very get off my lawn. And we saw that as a lost cause that nobody was going to spend money on. And so, little by little, by opening up these crazy shops of, I'm going to sell kites, I'm going to fix bikes, I'm going to, all these things that didn't seem to make sense, we're able to sort of attract people to that area. And now it's not only an amazing area, but that you are fighting a good fight when you're watching corporate America start trying to seize big parcels of your land and kick out long-standing galleries. That's sort of, at least in Arizona terms, that's when you sort of struck some gold. So that's sort of happening now. But I think in response to what you're saying, Amy, sorry, just to finish my thought, in response to your statement about whether or not this level of parenting had anything to do with sort of how we were raising latchkey kids, etc. I wasn't a latchkey kid and might as well have been. I think part of it, for me at least, was cultural, and how my Latina or my Mexican mom chose to really focus on the boys in our family and not the girls. But I also think that it had to do with how spread out we were. And so, thinking about how I was raised in a very rural community versus how I parented here in the city just was two different things. And some people might call it hovering or helicoptering. I called it like safety. So yeah, I don't know if that's a direct correlation to latchkey kid status or not. That's all.
You know, less than 10 minutes left. I would like to, that we've talked about here, sort of what I wanted to do with today too is just sort of the pulse of what everybody was thinking, future topics, future sessions, I don't know, whatever we want to call these, will be a little more focused on specific topics. Hessie and I were talking about issues of privacy. I think that we have a very different view of privacy than boomers do, but I think also a very different, even more different view of privacy than, say, millennials do. And there are a lot of topics like that. So I would love to hear from you all the types of topics, especially anything that you came up today. That
I have an idea.
You'd like to talk more about in future. Who was that?
I've got an idea for a topic. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I mean, there's so many topics, right? So there's a lot of things we could discuss, but I think, what was most on my mind when I really started thinking and writing about this and put out the article was the advantages. Like, there's the angry side that wants to rant about all the stuff that we had to go through, but I'm pretty proud to be a Gen X. I think that we have a lot of really awesome traits as far as being really resourceful and independent and willing to just go out on our own and figure things out. And it's like, if you like me, fine. If you don't, whatever. And I think that there are ways to leverage the strengths and weaknesses of each generation so that we can all work better together. Because the fact is that for whatever reason, we're all stuck working together. As much as I can complain about the boomers not leaving the C-suite open because they're not retiring, or their political leanings and how it's damaging to us and so forth, the boomers definitely had their own set of problems, and they're in the position they're in because the dot-com crash and the housing crash affected them pretty hard. And then the millennials have their own problems, but I think that we all have strengths and weaknesses, and there's a way that we can dialogue with each other so that we can put those to use to benefit everybody. Because we kind of have to bloom where we're planted. And I don't think that, pointing fingers, I'm not saying we're pointing fingers on this call, but a lot of the articles I read and the stuff I see, it's like everybody just kind of likes to vent at one another and then galvanize the troops around, talking to only people that agree with you. And, that never works. Not if you want to find solutions, and not if you want to become aware of what's going on outside your own backyard. You can form a self-reinforcing echo chamber all you want, and with the internet it makes it possible to only ever have to communicate with people that think like you do. But what is that really going to do for us? I think it's kind of going to be up to our generation to come up with the ideas, because we are the independent thinkers. The millennials are way too focused on themselves right now, just like we were when we were in our 20s, and the boomers are trying to figure out how to survive into their old age without running out of money, and they're not necessarily thinking about us.
Mm-hmm. No, that's actually Alexander, popped in the chat saying, improvisation and resourcefulness, and I do think that that's definitely a hallmark of Gen.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. I just want to add something before we end. I'm so actually grateful. I'm actually super happy to be a Gen X. I really am, because we lived in pre-internet era. We knew something totally different. We saw the advent of it. We saw the beginning of it, and we lived it. And we're kind of native of it too. So I just love this. I'm just talking about technology in general and communication and mass media in general, but we have seen it all, and I find it really, really super enriching. But on the other hand, uh, when you don't have a beaten path, you just have to improvise a lot, and you have to be super, super creative. And I think that helped actually a lot. If it didn't kill you, it helped you a lot. Just this, like totally like vast space of like, what the hell am I supposed to do now? I have no freaking idea. My parents keep telling me their model set in stone. I'm like, that's not going to work. That's not it. This is just empty. And then you just have to invent. And I keep inventing for like 25 years or so. Every morning I wake up. And I think that's actually great about our generation, because I see that like in you right now this evening, and I see a lot in other people that I meet from our generation is this resourcefulness and improvisation and being really creative, because you just have to in order to survive.
Absolutely. Anyone else?
I just wanted to add to what Durga said with respect to, kind of, what did you say, Durga? You said we need to bloom where we're planted, right? And I think that's true, right? Because, we, certainly in what I do, there's a lot of bitching about millennials, right? Because depending on what job you're in, depending on who your incoming work pool is, they're either more inspiring or more horribly frustrating. I've got colleagues that don't work in my industry that have a staff of millennials, usually in something like digital media, where they're like full of hope and great ideas and talent, and they just come in charged for the day. And I fired 6 last year. Like, it was insane. I wanted to have a policy that said no millennials, although I knew that was just unrealistic and unfair. And it was just this niche group. They're all around the same age. But, like, what are you going to do? You can't. This is the incoming generation. This is who we're going to pass this on to. So we're either going to mentor this generation, work with this generation, figure out how to coexist peacefully and productively, or not survive at all. So I liked what you had to say about finding a mechanism to do that rather than just complain about it, which is kind of the Gen X way.
And they are pretty cute. I mean, millennials are adorable. You gotta admit, they're adorable in their idealism and their optimism. And I was exactly that way. I mean, when I was in my early 20s, I still thought I could take over the world. And I wonder how much cynicism is really from being Gen X and how much of it is just from banging into some walls.
Yeah, I know. Okay, well, we only have 1 minute. I'm just giving you a...
Yeah, no, I was just about to say, I think this was a really, I think this was a really great, first step, and there's a lot of really interesting stuff that came out of here. And I will be sending a follow-up email. We're going to have a blog post that'll go up a week from today with excerpts from the conversation, and I'll be sending it to everybody. And we're going to be having 2 weeks. Not everybody needs to be on every time. We have some people who couldn't make it tonight who want to participate, so it'll sort of rotate around. After we do it a few times, we may move it to weekly. It just sort of depends. I felt like we all have a lot of us are parents, and we have a lot of other things going on, so weekly might be a little stretch, at least at the beginning, so we'll sort of play that by ear. Hessie?
Cool.
Yeah, no, that's it. And thanks, guys, for coming. And stay tuned for the next episode in a couple of weeks. And we'll get back to you in terms of the next topics and all that based on what everybody put in the Hangout. So thanks for coming, and we'll see you next time.
Yep, and when I send the email out, I'm not going to BCC everybody this time. I did that because I don't like sending everybody emails with like a whole bunch, a group email with everybody's emails public, but I feel like now you've all met each other, and so you can be responsible adults and not prank email each other.
If you try to prank email, is your refrigerator running?
All right, thanks everybody. Really, I truly appreciate you all showing up tonight.
Thanks, Amy.
Thanks for hosting, Amy. This is
Bye.
awesome.
Thank you for including me.